Ian, thank you so much for sharing part of your Saturday with us. Right away, I just want to get your reaction to that mom's account of what was happening outside of Robb Elementary School. What stands out to you about those interactions between police and parents outside the school?
Oh, good morning. Thank you for having me. And I can tell you, just listening to those parents, it's heart-wrenching to understand that they're sitting there wanting law enforcement to go in, and law enforcement did not go in. You have to realize this, that when lives are in danger and bullets are flying, we need to get in there right away and stop these active assailants. Society expects it. Listen, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a grandfather. I know how those people feel, and I'm so sorry for what happened, and we've got to do a better job. We have to look at what transpired here and make sure this does not happen again.
So what would, in your eyes, accountability look like?
Yeah, so accountability starts obviously with looking at the timeline of what transpired, looking at the training. What was the training for these people? How often did they do active assailant training? What was their resources capability? What was their policy? Who was on shift? Why was that officer off campus? Why wasn't the key in the hands of the officers? Why didn't they protect? Those schools are like embassies. When bullets are flying, we need to make sure we protect those schools. That school should have gone on a lockdown. Looking at the ability of why was that door propped open? Looking at 911, was the information passed down about what was going on? You know, in Florida, we've created some great new standards after Parkland, and we need to implement those standards in Texas and across the United States to make sure things like this don't occur, especially with communications and on-scene information.
Well, I specifically wanted to ask you about this system that you developed to deal with these scenarios. It's called REMS. What protocols do you think would have made this shooting response different?
Well, you see, the Readiness Emergency Management Schools was developed by the United States Department of Education, and I was part of that as part of their team. This deals with prevention, intervention, and enforcement, making sure that we do things before. We have to make sure we have threat assessment teams, mental health awareness training to make sure that we stop these types of people from actually going out and committing these acts. And then also protecting the school, protecting those critical infrastructures, making sure that we train. How you train is how you're going to respond. You need to take it seriously. We need to make sure that those schools are protected, making sure that those doors are locked, we have proper camera systems, we integrate the information that we're getting with technology, such as Alyssa's law that we have here in Florida, where that information, in the minute you push the button on your smartphone, that information goes directly to 911, and 911 is essentially sending that information to dispatch back down to the law enforcement officer so they can go in and make the actionable actions and go in and take action what they need to do. So the Readiness Emergency Management Schools is a holistic approach that's been developed for years to the U.S. Department of Education, and I really believe that schools and communities need to take aim on this.
And Ian, I do want to get your reaction to this. The police chief of Uvalde School District, Pedro Pete Arredondo, he made the decision to delay the entry. He hasn't directly answered questions about that decision yet. As a former police chief for schools, do you think he needs to step forward and take questions right now?
Well, right now what's happening is there's an investigation going on. There's police-involved shooting. He's a subject witness. Anything he say can be used towards an investigation, whether it's civil or criminal from that standpoint. So yes, in some sense, he does need to step forward and provide some type of statement. And obviously, he's getting counseled right now as far as maybe not to provide that statement. But accountability needs to be made. I believe the state of Texas will hold accountability like we did here in the state of Florida with our MSD commission right after Parkland. I can tell you that this type of action would not have happened in Miami because we are prepared. We have been prepared for years on this. This would never have happened.
And Ian, I want to get your perspective on something that I've heard repeatedly about perhaps reworking the architecture of schools, changing the way that schools are laid out to try to prevent shootings. What are your thoughts on that? Because it seems to me that in this country, education, given all the amount of money, the hundreds of millions of dollars that's spent on education, it's still not enough. I've spoken to people in this community that lament how teachers at the school are having to spend of their own money to provide basic things to their students. Is there an imperative to try to change the architecture of schools to prevent shootings like this, or are there other more efficient ways to do that?
Well, I believe we've got to do a balance of human capital and technology at the same point. You got to remember, the vast majority of schools in the United States were built, they weren't built for security, they were built for other means, for entry, et cetera. So we got to have single port of entries. That does require a lot of cost, but you've got to, first thing you got to do, you got to do an analysis, an assessment of the facility. Break down what the cost is. After you break down what the cost is, go out and implement those costs. Yes, schools need to have single point of entries. We need to utilize technology such as cameras, making sure they go back to a central point where they're being monitored, use of artificial intelligence to capture that information on how to respond. Communications, once again, I can tell you that communications back on these incidents on what's occurring is very, very important. But yes, we need to have more investment into our schools. That starts with our legislatures and our tax dollars and where they go, so that teachers don't have to use their own money, but obviously schools need to be more protected. Think of these schools like embassies. We've got to protect them. That SRO should have been there protecting that campus instead of going towards the shooting. That school should have been on lockdown, the door should have been locked, and it should have been protected on site that day.
It is a sad state of affairs in this country when the urgency for security at schools is almost as high as the urgency for basic things like books and pencils and paper. Chief Ian MOFFETT, we have to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Of course. I want to bring Christi, Paul, back into the conversation. And Christi, one of the things that stands out in my mind for the parents, for the family,